Welcome to From the Spectrum podcast. This is a podcast about autism. It is my goal to explain what is autism. I plan to use a mixture of scientific literature, personal experience, and opinion. With opinion, I will explain why I feel the way I do and give examples. I will provide links to various references for each episode. For each episode, we will discuss various aspects of autism. For today's episode, we will cover Hans Asperger's, Autistic Psychopathy in childhood. Asperger really highlighted autistic intelligence and Asperger's little professors. Immediately, Asperger defines autist as a disturbance of limited interaction, little influence from the environment, and he captures Eugen Buehler's description from the 1911 book. Autistic psychopathy today would translate into autism personality disorder. Remember covering very similar conditions with schizotypy personality disorder. This personality disorder, schizotypy, provides more detailed traits or phenotypes than the language used in modern criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Immediately, Asperger warns physical appearance, expressive functions, and whole behavior resulting in severe characteristics implicating social integration. He highlights a spectrum here, from profound to some children can compensate based on a higher level of original thought and experience, leading to exceptional achievements later in life. Exact words, exceptional achievements later in life. We already know what prevents or delays or implicates that. That is, society lacking critical thinking and a capacity to understand and guide our specific phenotypes into our abilities, superpowers or not. And Asperger highlights this. We can find our social role. The delta is, how much will you interfere? Because we are different than you and different from the social norms. Remember, autist, and remember me saying, maybe, too many times, the biology that gives us autism allows us to be comfortable within ourselves. Jack Kruse considers it an atavastic condition. His work in quantum physics describes autism better than anyone else's you will know. Like Kanner, Asperger discriminates differences from the schizophrenic condition, first coined by Eugen Buehler, and it's accurate. These are different conditions from severe schizophrenic conditions. Buehler's book from 1911 was covered in Understanding the Rates of Autism episode. Okay, Asperger's 1944 paper. But first, it is remarkable the time frame similar to Kanner. Asperger and Kanner being from the same country, yet studied autism across the world from each other. I cannot understand how the timing of this does not jump out to more people. Might it be recency bias? Viewing from a very narrow lens and people complicating autism and the rates of autism. The rates, like most or all chronic conditions we are seeing, follow the shift to artificial light during the day and night, and away from sunlight, and the types of artificial light. There are differences between incandescent, CFL, and LED and tech light. Please know, just because you don't know something is true does not mean it is not true. Okay, 1944. Asperger has roughly 200 children he has experienced. The paper highlights 4 detailed case studies. The first born in 1933, Fritz V. Severe social integration is immediately highlighted. Fritz began going to the clinic in Vienna in 1939 and referred by his school for being, quote, uneducatable by the end of his first day in school. Fritz was the first child of his parents and had a brother when Fritz was 2 years old. The brother had similar difficulties, but not as much. Fritz's birth was normal. He had motor movement delays. He spoke at 10 months, walked at 14 months. He was clumsy and had trouble learning daily functioning skills. His speech and expression and sentence were superior and learned quickly to talk like an adult. Fritz never did what he was told to do. He did what he wanted to do, or the opposite of what he was told to do. Hard stop. Today, that would be autism with comorbid, probably ADHD and ODD. A couple of prescriptions, stimulants, antipsychotics, the whole centralized medical paradigm of diagnoses and medications. Modern medicine is sickening with this. Modern medicine and psychology will throw 3, 4, 5 diagnoses at one person. Newsflash, it's just autism. See Autism and the ADHD episode for more details. These two do not exist within the same person. In addition, Fritz was restless and fidgety. He was destructive. Fritz was never interested in play or with other children. Other kids would, quote, wound him up. Exact words. Remember sensory processing. Fritz had tendency of breaking things and being aggressive. One thing to note, as a difference to Canner kids and Asperger's, Asperger's typically had more aggression than Canner's did. Fritz, like most, or like all even, had no real love for other people. At least shown. Remember the 3 episodes on relationships. 1 with Jonathan Mitchell. 1 with the clinician, Dr. Teresa Regan, and the solo Autism and Relationship episode. I think valuable information on this topic comes from these 3 episodes. Occasionally, Fritz showed bouts of affection. Asperger described this as a fit, a remarkable feature of Fritz's phenotype. He would talk to strangers. Fritz had a so-called strange phenomenon of stereotypy movements and habits. Some family history of Fritz includes creative members and poetry and intellectuals. Fritz's grandfather had similar childhood disobedience. This is interesting to me. So-called behaviors as a child has many factors, though. Fritz's mother had an inner world similar to him, preoccupied with her own thoughts. Fritz's father was 55 at the time of his birth. Both mom and dad were socially withdrawn. His posture, voice, and speech were abnormal. Eye gaze was noticed and abnormal. It was lacking. He gave short glances only. Similar to Canner description, Asperger said it was like he wasn't there. He had bouts of echolalia and often did not respond to verbal commands. He ate strange and inappropriate things and objects. Paper, wood, whole pencils, and lead. Disclaimer here. I ate cigarette butts as a child. A lot of them. Even after I should have so-called known better. Maybe related to his strange eating objects, but Fritz had GI problems. This is huge. Same as the Canner kids, and same as research suggests today. Autism and GI is very impressive, the data here. Despite being socially withdrawn, he could recall and had excellent apprehension of others and of situations. This is common. The perception is we are withdrawn, but we are very much aware of the surroundings and are learning in constant and in real time. Remember the example of the Bee movie. Remember how much we are processing and at the rates of this processing. Fritz had a strong interest and talent with numbers and calculations. Perhaps a savant. He was self-taught with fractions, negative numbers, percents, and so forth. A highlight of Asperger's paper, and mentioned here many times. A crucial message of the entire podcast. At the end of page 45 from the paper, Asperger's paper, Asperger says, quote, "We see something that we have come across in almost all autistics, a special interest which enables them to achieve extraordinary levels of performance in a certain area. This is the autistic phenotype. Limited, special interest, fixations, and perfecting that. This is incomplete contrast of today's educational system and social norms." The next child is Helmuth L, 8.5 years old. School was unmanageable. He failed in all subjects. He was stubborn and independent from an early age. Socially withdrawn, he was considered odd and was subject to ridicule. Like Fritz, if a question did not interest him, he would shut off. He had rigid facial expressions, clumsy, struggled with daily life, including getting washed. Asperger highlights a delta here, a difference, of teacher and adult expectation, and autistic capability or function. I guess I could say desire here too, meaning how much a teacher or adult expects us to do something and how much they are non-negotiable of that task in comparison of how much we are non-negotiable. How much of a difference is clashing here between the other adult or the family member, staff member, educator, and us? How much difference is going on here? This is delicate. I'm not saying we get a pass from the rules, but are we even really talking about the rules? Are we talking about social norms, these so-called human creations and so forth. Human creation and these abstract ideas of that one human or a set or a collection of humans create a norm and a task that they see fit for others to follow, to shape, to develop, to enforce those norms onto others. Then evaluate the other or the others on those created set of standards and calculate the results. Everything we do can be turned into a number. That's what we do in neuroscience and psychology and medicine, statistics and so forth. This is why I say, can you fit in or not? Are you like the so-called normal people or not? Don't try to change an autistic because they are different than you. Check your reflexive conflict happening within your nervous system and be aware of your own underlying beliefs and how much that is motivating and moving you. Parents, family, friends, educators, medicine likely have a driving force to guide them towards a helping role, to help the struggling person, the person that they consider in need or that verbalize need and help. They want to help the struggling autistic. Remember our phenotype, thinking style, abilities, in some cases, our superpowers. All of these have a stark contrast, a delta to the norm. On that, Helmuth and Asperger noted, autistic children needed extensive, deliberate teaching. Asperger also mentioned the use of a timetable. Remember, restricted, repetitive behaviors. These are our obsessions, intelligence or not. The next case study is Ernest, age 7.5, normal birth and development, besides slight delayed speech. Then Ernest, vocabulary and language, was considered like an adult. He was socially withdrawn. The environment, surroundings, was not there. Consider a troublemaker. He self-taught himself how to count and the letters of the alphabet before school. In school, he failed. Asperger says, failed miserably. He argued with the teacher on how to hold the pen. Hard stop. We just covered this. The delta with the social norms. That teacher, seeing Ernest hold a pen differently, had conflict within herself or within himself. Also to note, however, his penmanship was bad, which is likely every autistic person ever. Ernest was very precise and routine-like. However, in some matters, he was messy. It is an interesting autistic paradox here. He was vasoliable. Remember my suspicion with copper and melanin. Ernest would turn red, bright, blotchy red, when embarrassed or excited. This role of copper, synthesizing tyrosine and to make melanin, seems suspicious to me. Seems like a region of interest. He had bad eye gaze, stereotypies, clumsy, aggressive towards others. No friends of peers or staff. He was teased at school, horrible with spelling, slow reading, Remember the speech and language dynamic with reading and sensory processing. We silently speak to ourselves. During reading, we utilize the same muscles used in speech, and we speak silently to ourselves to teach ourselves. He confused letters and typically blended letters together. Asperger believed Ernest, despite severe academic performance, was able to advance to higher grades because he could talk in great detail about topics. During these conversations, Ernest was bright. During school requirements and curriculum, he had major struggles. Later, it was considered Ernest was dyslexic. His best chance, it was determined, to be in a small group or one-on-one instead of the normal classroom. No doubts, this is the way. This is best suited for most autistic phenotypes. The next child was Helmuth L. At birth, mother was 41, and Helmuth was the fourth child. He had severe asphyxia at birth. Soon after, convulsions twice. Now, with everything we've covered about oxygen and cytochrome C oxidase and the mitochondria, we know we breathe. We breathe so oxygen can enter the body and cytochrome C oxidase can function and make water. This is very interesting, especially with the roles of how light and water are entangled. Not all water is created equal. Our mitochondria are very sensitive to the environment. And let's think about the environment changing. Back then, in the 1930s, it was first changed. This is all going along with the light as a cause of autism. Helmuth had delayed development, including size, speech and language. As a child, he learned how to talk like an adult. Helmuth was obese, which was rare back then. Despite a strict medical diet, whatever that meant back then, he was still obese. And he did not have a big appetite. Now remember everything now with this artificial light and how humans are evolved under that sunlight, which is massively different than the artificial light. Helmuth here might be the best case study for this. In addition, he had excessive saliva. Asperger began seeing him at age 11. He had abnormal eye gaze, clumsy, a weak body. Handshake felt like rubber. There was no bone. He had sexual tendencies and urges later as a teen that were quite abnormal. Quite frankly, with what we know now, Helmuth's hypothalamus was large. It must have been large. A complete loss of thermodynamics running through the hypothalamus. The paper gives other details about exogenous hormones. He was on many different types of hormones. He had advanced vocabulary. He spoke poetically and had interest in poetry. He did not care. He didn't fit in. Remember, the biology that gives us autism allows us to be comfortable within ourselves. Academically stated, uneven. He had advances and deficiencies, intense rituals, and he was obsessed with cleanliness. Those are the 4 case studies. Asperger quotes on page 68. Once one has properly recognized an autistic individual, one can spot such children instantly. Now, a brief summary of the 200 cases. Some common features. At age 2, the phenotypes were seen and lasted through the lifespan. Children had learning and conduct problems. Adolescents had job and performance problems. Adults had social and marital problems. I fit all of those. All had eye gaze problems. Asperger mentions at age 3 months you can begin to see this. And now, modern day, we have a biomarker for eye movement and eye tracking. This is such an advancement by Asperger. Asperger suggested autistics perceive with a peripheral vision. And this also explains why we know and can give detail about the surroundings and look like we are not paying attention. Asperger mentions autistics can drift out of interaction. Once we are done, we are done. Remember me saying, I will just leave. Family gatherings and such, and making a joke like, the gathering will gather without me. Tone within speech is in question with autistics. This is a component of speech and language. It is a method of conveyance. Asperger highlights Autistic Intelligence. A highlight Asperger mentions is the original ideas autistic children possess. This explains the advanced language scene for certain topics and interest of those autistic children, meaning it was present at times, and other times it was massively deficient. This is Asperger's little professors. This is my favorite part of all of autism. This is the result of that B3 symptom that we discuss so often. This is the creative and intellectual and thinking in pictures attempted to be transformed into abstract language and conveyed to the receiver. Maybe Asperger's and lower level 1 autism is simply a human creation based on those set of ideas expressed and developed by a collection of others, attempting to show or express a delta from social norms. Humans love to do this. We love to subordinate and identify, subject, define differences. Maybe Asperger's and level 1 are simply just acceptable and fine, normal phenotypes with slight differences that are not abnormal or a disorder. And if not, in a modern created world, if you take this phenotype across the lifespan, across evolution, would simply fit in. But maybe modern humans do this way too much. Maybe Michelangelo, or maybe it was Einstein and Da Vinci, Henry David Thoreau, or Sir Isaac Newton. Maybe these people had this autistic phenotype. This is not me saying they were autistic and trying to claim them and group them in. I'm not into this group in, group out, or this type of movement. I'm simply saying that just phenotype that we're describing here today is perfectly acceptable. It is a path for those superpowers that, once again, we're just defining. If you are listening to the episode or listening to the podcast, please feel free to leave a review or rating. In podcasting, reviews, ratings, and downloads are huge, and I very much appreciate your feedback. You can contact me on X, and we can discuss autism at RPS 47586. You can click on the Hop link for access to all of the shows, different platforms, and contact information. You can email me, info.fromthespectrum@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to From the Spectrum podcast.